Hello and welcome to Corpus Cast, part of the Aston Originals series, providing fresh perspectives from Aston University experts. My name is Robbie Love and I'm a lecturer in English language here at Aston University. I'm a corpus linguist, meaning that I study linguistic patterns, trends and variations using large samples of language data. So on behalf of the Aston Corpus Linguistics Research Group, welcome to the show. Corpus Cast is the show all about corpus linguistics and what it can do for society. And thanks to your positive feedback to our first 3 episodes with Paul Baker, Eleanor Semino, and Pascual Perez Paredes, I'm thrilled that Corpus Cast will be continuing for the remainder of the year, which is great news. So we'll be carrying on. And in this series, I'll be speaking with top researchers in the field to find out more about how corpus linguistics can be applied to a diverse range of areas. So in this episode of Corpus Cast, our topic is how corpus linguistics contributes to research in the area of forensic linguistics. Forensic linguistics is one of our specialist areas here at Aston University, so I didn't have to venture very far to find not one, but 2 guests to speak with me on this topic in today's episode. I'll be speaking to Tim Grant, Professor of Forensic Linguistics here at Aston University and Director of the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics, whose mission is to improve the delivery of justice through the analysis of language. Tim is one of the world's leading practitioners in forensic linguistics, widely published, particularly in the area of authorship attribution and in contexts including online communication, police interviews, and cases of sexual assault, and has provided evidence in numerous criminal cases. I'll also be speaking to Dr. Lucia Busso, a research associate in forensic linguistics at the Aston Institute for Forensic Linguistics. Lucia is a cognitive linguist who uses corpus methods to inform her work in forensic contexts, specifically contexts including the analysis of abusive letters, as we'll be discussing today, and language in the news media. So we have not one, but 2 guests here today, and we'll be discussing the role of corpus linguistics in forensic linguistics. So I'm very pleased to welcome both Tim Grant and Lucia Busso to Corpus Cast. Hello, Tim. Hello, Lucia, and welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Thank you both for agreeing to come on. And this is the first time we've had not one, but 2 guests together. So I'm really excited about this. Thanks both of you for coming along. I want to start with you, Lucia, as you are more sort of directly active in corpus linguistics specifically, and then we'll move on to talk about forensic linguistics as well. Yeah. This is a question I ask all of my guests to start off the episode. What does corpus linguistics mean to you? What is it?
Okay. So difficult question, but I think I can answer by saying that I distinctly remember when I first heard of corpus linguistics during my undergrad degree, just mentioning it by my professors. And I was really, really impressed by the terms ecological data, which is somehow, sometimes how we refer to corpus linguistics, because you're looking at data in their natural habitat, somehow you just observe language. And that was amazing to me. I immediately liked it because I'm a firm believer in observational science. So I like to be a fly on the wall and just observe everything that's going on. So I was immediately drawn to that. So I think that kind of attitude just stuck with me. So for me, corpus linguistics is being able to observe language change, how people use language, what can language do in society by being a little fly on a wall behind a screen.
I like that. I like that animal metaphor. I often use the bird's eye view metaphor, looking over a large sample of the landscape of language, so to speak. So that's great. We've got the fly on the wall and the bird in the sky. So we'll see what else we come up with. How did you get started in corpus linguistics?
Well, by chance, the short answer is because, so for my undergraduate dissertation in Italy, I studied, my undergrad degree was at the University of Perugia, where I'm from. And so I really wanted to study the grammaticalization of adverbial phrases in Italian, because I noticed that sometimes you have like these phrases that are separate words, but speakers are not really conscious that they are separate words anymore, so they kind of write them together or they misspell them. So I was interested in looking at that, and I had no idea how to do that. So I went to my supervisor, and she introduced me to corpus linguistics. So that was like my first corpus-based analysis, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I hear from a lot of people that they end up getting into it by chance,
Yeah.
and then realizing what it's all about and deciding, okay, I want to keep doing this for a long time to come. That's great to hear. Thanks, Lucia. We'll move over to Tim now. You just heard Lucia talking about corpus linguistics, so I'm going to ask you a similar question about forensic linguistics. What would you say is the central endeavor, if you will, of a forensic linguist?
So forensic, there's lots of sort of definitions of forensic linguists, which can include sort of lists of tasks we might get involved in, or list of topic areas that forensic linguists study. I like to take a sort of functional definition for forensic linguistics, and you mentioned it in your intro that, you know, forensic linguistics is an attempt to improve the delivery of justice through the analysis of language. And that can take a variety of forms. So at the Aston Institute, we have people studying the language of police interviews and interrogations. Some of Lucia's project is in lay legal text, the language of contracts. My own work tends to be at the investigative end of forensic linguistics, where I help police or others with their investigations, and I sometimes, as you've said, end up taking evidence to court. So forensic linguistics is a broad umbrella, but it covers all these things, and the unifying idea is this idea of improving the delivery of justice. If it's to do with justice and through language analysis, then it counts as forensic linguistics for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting, and it's, you know, amazing as a relatively new colleague here at Aston to see this incredible team of forensic linguists that you've amassed in your institute. Some of whom, of course, including Lucia, are trained in corpus methods. You wouldn't necessarily describe yourself as a corpus linguist, Tim, but of course you have used corpus methods in your work, and as I mentioned, you work with corpus linguists, including Lucia. So could you kind of summarize the main ways that corpus linguistics, in your view, contributes to the sort of work that you do in forensic linguistics?
Sure. So there are different ways in which we use corpus linguistics. So if you're studying legal texts or phone calls, we've got a colleague who's studying domestic violence phone calls to ask for help and so on. There are a variety of linguistic methods you can apply. You can apply conversation analysis methods. You can do sort of various forms of critical discourse analysis. If you're interested in the pursuit of justice, justice is about power, and critical discourse analysis can be really useful. But very often we will amass a fairly large amount of text, and that's where corpus linguistics comes into its own. So we will build corpora from forensic texts and forensic contexts to study what's going on in those contexts. But also in my own investigative work, a lot of the work I do is on authorship analysis. And there's 2 or 3 forms that authorship analysis takes. So there's the idea of profiling an author from their text. So this is about studying language variation across gender, across age, across professional registers. And all of this is best achieved through building relevant corpora and then looking for similarities and differences. And in comparative authorship analysis, in the actual casework, you've got to say what's typical and what's distinctive in a certain speech community or language community. And the only way you can get this sort of base rate knowledge as to what features stand out for an individual is through building corpora of some kind or another.
So you'd end up comparing texts that have been written potentially by a particular individual to other texts and finding what's distinctive?
Yeah. So say you have well, we're going to talk in a minute about the Operation Heron Letter, so I'll go in a different direction rather than discover that. So say you have a disputed communication, and you have a suspect for having written that. So it might be someone's written you a threatening letter, Robbie, and the police have done some investigation, and they've looked at your computer, and then maybe they've identified where it's come from. So they have a suspect. And then they get a warrant and they seize the suspect's computers, and they can't find the actual threat that was sent to you, but they find lots of other writings from that suspect. Okay, so the question then is, so you can just look at the similarity in the language, the word choice, the syntax, the pragmatics of what they wrote, and look for similarity in all this wealth of text that we've now captured from their computer. But that's not enough. Okay, because it's not enough, because they both in the threatening communication and from their computer, they will both use the word the. Okay, so that's a point of similarity, right? That's only an important point of similarity if you can show that the suspect uses it in an atypical way. And at that point, to answer the question, well, what's atypical about their language use, you have to have some background corpus that you're comparing their language to. And this is where forensic linguistics gets interesting, because what's the ideal background corpus? Is it a general corpus of English language, like the BNC or something like that? Or is it something from their close speech community? Because if you just say a word is atypical against English language or British English in a general sense, that's not enough to say it's atypical. You might be picking up features of Birmingham English, and the BNC represents some Birmingham English, but every speaker of Birmingham English would be atypical. So you want to really narrow down your corpus collection onto their speech community. And so these are the ways in which we collect on the fly different corpora for comparison purposes from one case to the next. And often they're fairly small corpora. You and Lucia were talking about big corpus methods and bird's eye views. Our corpora will be collected from within a particular case, and therefore won't be into the millions and even billions of words. They will be a lot smaller than that, very often.
I think you raise a really interesting point there, because often when we talk about corpus linguistics, the instinct is to say, oh yes, it's looking at big samples of language using these particular methods of looking for patterns or relationships between words. But as you say, actually now, the diversification of the applications, what this series is all about, looking at different ways that these methods are applied. Yes, some of it is really going down the so-called big data route with massive data sets. But in your case, you might be analyzing a corpus comprising a few text messages or
so this is where thinking about building the corpus from the language community gets really interesting, because so if the threat was sent to you by text message and we've arrested the suspect, we think we know who it was, but we haven't demonstrated that, and the forensic linguistics is going to contribute to that as evidence. What I would do is, so you've got the phone download. They've downloaded all the messages sent from the device that the police have seized, and it doesn't contain the actual threatening communication. But what you will have on that phone is you will have probably several hundred, sometimes say 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 other messages that person has written. Yeah. So you're talking about, say, 10,000 messages of about 10 words or 5 words. So 100,000 word corpus of their language. But then what I do is I ask for all the other messages on that phone, because that's quite a nice representation of that person's language community. So I might have another, say 10, 50,000 words of other people's language that person communicates with quite a lot. And that can create my background corpus. So what I'm asking then is, against their speech community, what do they do that's atypical? And if I can establish that there's some language features that's atypical in their speech community, I can then go and look at the disputed communication, the anonymous threat, and say, well, we know this set of 6, 8, 12 features are really unusual in their speech community, and here they are, or here they're not in the disputed text. And then you can draw some conclusion of consistency and distinctiveness. We don't draw the conclusions and therefore they wrote it. We leave that up to the jury. We just point out how rare the feature is and that it occurs across the different contexts.
Wow, goodness, that's incredible. It really is. And you mentioned before Operation Heron, which is a particular case that you worked on. I'd like to talk about that some more. This was a case of somebody sending some pretty nasty letters a little over a decade ago. Is that right? I wonder, Tim, if you could tell us a bit more of the context behind this case, but in particular.
So I was asked to get involved in this by the police, and it was a number of individuals in the public eye and also private individuals had been sent racially and sexually abusive letters, old-fashioned letters, written letters. And the letter's been sent for about an 18-month to 2-year period, 2007, 2009, that sort of timing. And there's all sorts of forensics went into examining who had written these letters. They ended up writing to the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown, which is why the police got very interested as to what was going on. They weren't threatening communications, they were abusive communications.
Right.
And so you get all sorts of forensics in a case like this, where you get they'll be able to say where they were posted from, and obviously they're testing for fingerprints and DNA and other stuff. But my task was to say, can I say anything about the writer? And this is a classic forensic linguistic profiling task. It's a form of authorship analysis where it's never going to be used in evidence. The courts don't allow that to be admitted as evidence in the way that they would allow a comparative authorship analysis to be admissible. So I was first asked, could I profile the writer? And I came up with a profile of an older woman writer. And then in the end, I ended up appearing on BBC Crime Watch to put an appeal out about, did anyone recognize the language in these letters? Because we know that people recognize language style. And there were also some interesting cartoons and so on that were involved. So it resulted in a Crime Watch appeal. And that indirectly, but that eventually led to the arrest of the perpetrator.
Oh, so the individual was found eventually?
Yes, it was quite fun because I'd said it was an older woman, and some of the police officers on the case believed that it would be a young skinhead type person, probably a bloke. And they found, so as a result of the Crime Watch appeal, one of the things we were asking for was, are there further victims? Are there other people who've received these letters who've not reported them to the police? And someone came forward with a very recent letter that had a thumbprint on it. And that thumbprint had someone on their database, and it was a young skinhead man who was a sailor out of Portsmouth. And he was away at sea, and his boat was coming in 2 or 3 days. So they arrested him off the boat. And then when they took him home to search his house, he lived with his elderly mum, and she had been writing the letters. So I wouldn't be telling the story if I'd got the profile wrong, but on this instance, I was able to profile the demographics of the writer.
Wow, that's incredible, and it must have been quite a satisfying moment when you realised that your guess was pretty accurate in the end.
I'd like to correct the word guess. It was based in linguistic science.
Of course. Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And more recently, Lucia, you and Tim and a couple of your colleagues in the Institute published, or in the process of publishing, a paper about this case. So I sort of want to turn to you in terms of returning to a case from some time ago. What was the motivation in coming back to this case sometime later, Lucia?
Well, so there were a couple of reasons actually that sort of piled up. The most practical reason was that we had the data, right? Because in forensic linguistics, access to data is actually quite difficult and time-consuming, and so we had the data set already, and we were looking through, possible data sets and what would be interesting to analyze, how would we do it. It's some sort of these brainstorming meetings that we would have with the other members of our research team, which are Sarah Atkins and Martin Petico. And we came up with this sort of idea of doing a methodological contribution to forensic linguistics, trying to integrate quantitative and qualitative methods of corpus analysis. So showing with a case that was already solved. So we already knew that who was the perpetrator, what were their motives, all these things were already known. And we wanted to see if by doing some sort of a confirmatory linguistic analysis, we could sort of come up with, well, one, the same result, right? And B, to add something to what was already known, right? To add some more shade to what was already in the public domain about this, both from the police investigation and from the linguistic analysis that Tim did in 2009. So that was the main reason that we ended up using that data set particularly.
So what did you find, and how did corpus linguistics help you to make your observations?
So again, we were talking about like different sizes in corpora. And this is a pretty good example because this corpus is actually less than 10,000 words long.
Oh wow!
Okay. I've written longer papers and maybe longer angry texts, probably.
Same.
Right?
Yeah.
So and it was in this case it was actually pretty useful because all the members of the research team, well, Tim was of course really familiar with the data set. We were not at the beginning, but Martin and I kind of cleaned the corpus and systematized it a little bit, and we actually read through the whole thing, right? So we had some qualitative hunches, but what we did was first thing that was done was I performed a topic modeling algorithm, which is a text mining and machine learning type of thing, where this algorithm basically finds out through statistical techniques what are the main themes that are discussed in a certain collection of documents. But clearly, what the algorithm gives is a black box, right? The algorithm doesn't explain, I found this because I was thinking of that, or, this word's correlated with another word. So we found out through this computational technique that there were 4 main topics that the author was rambling about, basically. So healthcare, immigration, and then politics A and politics B, we call them. So 2 different strands of like propaganda and like politics talking. And the second part of the analysis was extracting the words from these topics. So seeing, okay, so you found this. Why did you find this? Like, what were the words that led the algorithm to this result? And then my colleague Martin did a qualitative semantic tagging kind of analysis on the corpus. And we, through that corpus analysis and through interreliability testing, so we had coders coming in and, see if the taxonomy that we found was kind of reliable, or, it was people that were not from our research group could come up with the same conclusions that we did, some sort of thing. And we, through that type of analysis, we were actually able to see inside the black box of the algorithm. So to see what were the complaints and demands that were making up, right, these topics. And we used that plus some statistical analysis, regression-like statistical analysis, using the algorithm as well to add some fine-grained information. So, for example, we know that healthcare, so the topic of healthcare comes in the earlier letters. So from 2007, the author starts talking about healthcare a lot, complaining. And the main complaint was that the NHS was ruined because there were too many immigrants working as doctors and not enough space given to English citizens. And then as time progresses, she moves on. So she doesn't talk about healthcare that much anymore. And she starts talking more about politics, immigration remains constantly, like she's constantly complaining about immigrants and, immigration is not a good thing, blah, blah, blah. But then after healthcare, she starts talking about political themes and sending letters, no more to NHS doctors as she did in the first time of her writings, but start sending letters to individuals in the public eye, like Gordon Brown, for example, or even private citizens, basically campaigning for the SNP party. So she really wants Scotland to gain independence from England because she considers Scottish people to be immigrants as well. So yeah,
welcome to our world.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she also talks a lot about Brexit, which was quite eerie in a sense, because you might be seeing, okay, this was 2009, but still. And so she moves on to talk about like these political themes, and also using these qualitative and very fine-grained semantic analysis. We were also able to distinguish between the two political themes that the algorithm found, which to us at a first glance looked pretty similar, but we're like, okay, the algorithm says so we're gonna use them both, I guess. But then doing this qualitative analysis, we were actually able to see that politics A, I think, if I remember correctly, is very much about the Scottish independence. So, voting the Scottish National Party, blah, blah, blah. Whereas in politics B, if I remember correctly, I might be getting them wrong, but one of those was about SNP, and the other was pretty much complaining about how much Scottish people exploit English money, English taxes. So they go together clearly because they make up the same argument, but one is more focused on the cause, so the Scottish exploit English, and the other one is more of the result of that cause. So, Scottish people should then vote for SNP and go away, basically. And yeah, it was a really interesting study to do and very interesting methodologies to put together, because it was something that has not been previously done, at least to the extent of our knowledge. And so it was really nice to see how the quantitative-based and the qualitative-based analysis kind of come together in the end, so they can really help each other in giving actually very precious information.
Wow, that's incredible. And just to sort of remind myself here, all of these approaches that you took are on a data set that's not even 10,000 words, So I guess you could say that you're demonstrating what more can be learned beyond simply reading manually.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because most of these things you wouldn't necessarily pick up just by doing not even a close reading of the text naturally, because we are sensitive to the statistical input of the text, but not at the level of that algorithm.
I can vouch for that. Obviously, when I was involved in the case, I was reading these texts again and again and again. It's small enough that you could do that.
Yeah.
And the question, what can you tell us about the writer, includes her interests and so on. And I had a list of things that were topics that she was interested in, but this fine-grained analysis isn't available just as a close reader. The corpus analysis that we've now done as a sort of retrospective move shows far more about the shift in interest and so on, and that could have been useful in terms of the investigation. We don't know retrospectively, but to understand the anonymous writer, to understand that there's this move from healthcare into politics and the nature of the political interest. There's any number of racists out there writing nasty letters, but the Scottish angle's a little bit unusual, right? Mostly, and she was writing very objectionable things about Afro-Caribbeans and the people from South Asia and all the people that you might expect. But the Scottish angle is a little unusual, and what does that mean? It tells you something about what's going on and can help the investigation. So there was more gleaned from the letters through the analysis that Lucia's just described than just a regular read through. Even an intensive read through several times would bring out.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, Tim, about how you don't, as a forensic linguist, you don't make the decision. You don't make a judgment. You provide your expert opinion based on the data that you're presented. I guess we could talk about Operation Heron, but also more generally in your experience. How forensic linguistics, my sort of layperson's understanding is that courts are a lot more accepting of linguistic evidence now than they were, a few decades ago, and that awareness is increasing over time. Thanks, of course, to places like your institute. Are there challenges, when you're sort of trying to convince people? Okay, I've done some analysis of language, and I've noticed these things. Do you know, how easy is it to get across the scientific aspect of what I suppose is traditionally viewed as more of an arts and humanities discipline, thinking about language?
So first of all, the kind of research that we did for Operation Heron would definitely come under the sort of the banner of profiling, or I use the term sociolinguistic profiling. Tell us about the writer. What can we say about their social and linguistic background? And that will never be admitted to the courts. But one of the impacts we have is feeding into investigations. Yeah, and they can be for the police or they can be for the defence. We're not prosecution biased in this, in that sense. But the sort of the question I heard really was how is linguistic evidence accepted in the courts in the UK and elsewhere? So authorship analysis has got a, say, 10, 15-year history of acceptance in British courts. It can be done wrong or it can be done right. And if it's done right, it can and should be accepted. I think there's various things going on in forensic science at the moment, which is really interesting. In terms of all forensic sciences have come under attack as being too subjective and not sciencey enough. And part of the work we've been doing is to build the scientific foundations for authorship analysis. So we've got projects studying the idea of an idiolect. So just as a dialect will be a language variety for a geographical area, an idiolect would be a language variety for an individual. Do you have an idiolect? Is there such a thing as an idiolect? Does everyone have an idiolect? All these kind of fundamental research questions are massively important to the background, the foundational science in forensic authorship analysis. So we contribute studies in that area. When it comes to whether linguistic evidence should be admitted to court, the standards are moving and getting sharper and harder. And it's all about validating your methods, moving away from a subjective expertise into something that, another linguist would come along, use the same method and get the same answer. And that's massively important. And the idea is that we should use validated methods and we should present our findings to the court as a weight of evidence, not a conclusion of guilt or innocence or match or non-match of two samples. So there's a lot of progress being made in forensic science at the moment, which we've been writing about and engaged in, and trying to ensure that linguistic evidence is up to the mark in these senses. So it is accepted. It's withstood appeal in the British courts, and it's been admitted in courts across Europe. The German Federal Police, the BKA, have a forensic linguistic unit. They're the only country in the world that have a dedicated forensic linguistic unit, and they have for some years. Other countries, there are different histories of how well admitted this kind of evidence is to the courts, but it's pretty well established.
And so, you obviously that's sort of one aspect of your work. Clearly, also as academics, as we've discussed, you're publishing your work in academic outputs, and a lot of these outputs can be accessed by anyone publicly. When you're publishing about these sorts of cases and you're talking about the methods that you've used, is there a danger that someone who's looking to commit a linguistic crime or a crime that can be detected linguistically could get a hold of your work and go, that's how they catch me. So I'm going to learn how to better
Yeah.
avoid being caught because I know what they're doing to catch me. It might be an obvious question, but also I'm just really curious as to does that come into the conversation about what you do and crucially what you don't say when you're publishing your work in academic outputs?
Yes. The short answer is yes. So I recently, with Nikki McLeod, did a project on online undercover policing, and these are the police officers who are engaged often in anti-paedophile operations and including on the dark web. So that area of the internet that is heavily encrypted and it's much harder to identify people on. We were very careful what we did and didn't publish in that text, and there's a whole chunk of stuff that will never be published. And obviously there's a great push to, as an academic, publish or perish. And so there's all the stuff we need to publish too. And when we're working with policing or governmental partners, there's often an upfront negotiation of can we publish this? And after working on cases like the Operation Heron case, I'll go back and say, is it okay to publish this now? Can I publish papers from it? And there's a fairly small set of casework that we have the proper permissions to create publications from, which is why sometimes you see the same data reanalyzed and reanalyzed. Just as a sort of footnote to that, one of the projects that we're interested in is how much knowledge there is of forensic linguistics within these dark web communities. And our colleague Christoph Fredens is currently running a project asking precisely that question, where he's done a big corpus study looking for key terms associated with forensic linguistics. And he does indeed find sort of security discussions of how not to get caught by forensic linguistics.
Wow.
So that's beginning to happen. And you can predict an arms race. There's also, as well as authorship analysis, there's a academic discipline in authorship obfuscation. So how do you take your personal style markers out of your text? At the moment, it's really quite poor quality. It reads like a machine-generated text, like a bad version of Google Translate. Okay, so it doesn't read like a flowing text. You could tell something weird's happened to it, but presumably that will improve over time. So yeah, these are very real questions.
That's a real challenge, as you say, as academics. The instinct is to publish anything and everything we do in our research, but clearly you've got a really important line, and not only necessarily with potential criminals finding your methods, but also presumably the sensitivity of some of the data that you have if you're working in particular contexts like the dark web or abuse cases, etc. as well.
And absolutely. And one of our big concerns is researcher well-being. Reading this material is nasty, and it kind of comes with a cost. And we do try our best to mitigate that and work with our researchers. The Institute has psychological support for researchers dealing with difficult data and so on and so forth. And it's a very real consideration, a very real concern we have. And when we come to publish, we don't want to create sort of a voyeuristic sense of this is nasty forensic data. There's a lot of true crime podcasts out there and things like that where they seem to there seems to be almost prurient interest in some of this stuff. And when we publish, we try not to do that. There comes a sort of a certain responsibility with this stuff, I think, to not feed that interest, which is just about the darkness, the dark side of things. So these are very real issues in academic work as a forensic linguist and in working as a forensic linguistic practitioner.
So it's not as glamorous as people might assume.
It doesn't feel very glamorous, I have to tell you. Most of the time it's more I don't know, film noir than Marvel.
Okay. I think that's a good place a good way to start wrapping things up. I want to finish by asking both of you our usual set of quick questions that we have here to end our Corpus Cast episode.
Okay.
So I'll ask a question. I'll ask for a quick answer from Lucia, and then a quick answer from Tim, and then I'll ask the next question. Okay. So here we go. first quick question. What are the biggest changes you've noticed in corpus research in your career so far?
Oh, well, my career is fairly short. So
Mine too.
I guess that I'm noticing more and more the so-called quantitative shift in linguistics. I mean, my career started right in the middle of that. So, but that's what I'm noticing, that more and more people are relying more and more onto quantitative methods, automated or not automated, but rather than just providing a qualitative analysis.
Okay,
That's
thank you. Same question for Tim.
Okay, I've got two quick answers. One is
All right.
size. Yeah. So I recently came across my copy of the co-build corpus, which fitted on a single CD, not a DVD, from 1991, and it was 2 million words, and that was one of the biggest corpora around. And these days we're dealing with billion-word corpora and more. But the other I think is more interesting is that corpus linguistics has moved from being a subject matter of research to just another tool in the linguist toolbox. And I think that's the big change. I'm not a corpus linguist, but I use corpus methods all the time. And there are those who are developing more corpus methods, and they're not just corpus users and corpus tool users, they're researchers in corpus linguistics. And I think any area of linguistics can be enhanced through applying corpus methods.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a really interesting point. Okay, I want to say things too. I want to move on to the next question. Otherwise, I'll be breaking my own rule. Quick questions, quick answers. Okay, quick question number 2. Back to Lucia. What has surprised you the most about your own work in corpus linguistics?
Ooh, okay. I guess that I will go back to what I was talking about before, about the adverbial phrases work that I did for my undergrad. I then revisited it in a more, nice way that the undergrad did with me. And I published a paper out of this. And actually, what really surprises me is that you can use synchronic corpora, so corpora that just describes the language as is now, not historical, not taking text from a long time ago. And then you can actually monitor language change just on a synchronic corpus if you have like a research question out of it. But to me, that's incredible. That's pretty fascinating.
Thank you. Okay, Tim.
So I think data is always surprising. So we've got a PhD student in the institute, Amy Booth, and one of the things she's studying is the careers that white nationalists do posting on an online white nationalist forum. Yeah, and we were expecting slightly different shapes in these careers. People have been there for a long time. People appear and disappear. What we hadn't been anticipating is career breaks. Yeah, so someone will, and so until you look at the data, you won't know what you'll see. And data is always surprising, and that's why you should be a corpus linguist or employ corpus methods.
Can't think of a better advert than that. Okay, final quick question back to Lucia. And you can answer this, and this for both of you, you can answer this either specifically relating to forensic linguistics or more broadly, if you have ideas about that as well. How will corpus linguistics, I should say, continue to make an impact on the world in the future?
Well, I think that corpus linguistics in forensic linguistics, as Tim was saying, would definitely help in validating methods, right? Especially in this quantitative shift. So employing like quantitative, reliable corpus methods could be a way of validating the methods that you use, and talking about more generally about society widely. I think that a lot of people are now realizing, even non-linguists, but a lot of people are now realizing that we function through language. Everything we do has some sort of language. So to analyze wide societal discourse, or things that have an actual impact in our world, like fake news or coronavirus, you have to analyze the language, and through the language you can actually see how a society conceptualizes the problem, or how a society is shaping a problem in general. And I think that's really good, and that is a really interesting period to be a linguist.
I agree. Thank you. Tim?
Okay, I was going to say validation, but Lucia stole my answer.
Ah.
But what I'm going to take a slightly different tack then, which is, so corpus linguistics was one of the original big data approaches, the data science approaches to analysing the world. And if you look at the progress of corpus linguistics, it starts at a fairly low level of analysis, looking at word positions within sentences, within millions of words or so on. And now most of the interesting work in corpus linguistics is, or to me, is work at the sort of the pragmatic and discourse level of texts. So we're shifting up a level into an area of the meaningfulness of text and how we mean with language in a much more rich way. And I think corpus linguistics is leading data analytics in that direction, and we will see data analytics getting less crude and more sophisticated in drawing meanings. And so I think there's a sort of methodological learning that corpus linguistics is leading the world in as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. And I look forward to seeing that happening in the future. Well, I want to bring things to a close now and thank both Tim Grant and Lucia Busso for coming on today. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. And it was such a pleasure to have you both. So really, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, so that is it for this episode of Corpus Cast. Thank you for joining us. However you've accessed us, whether that's on YouTube or Spotify or Google Podcasts or Podcast Addict or Podchaser, all the pods, please do let us know your thoughts about this and other episodes using the hashtag CorpusCast, and make sure to check out the Aston Corpus Linguistics Research Group on Twitter at Aston Corpus. Corpus Cast is an Aston Originals podcast written and hosted by me, Robbie Love, and produced by Sam Cook. So thanks again, and see you soon on the next episode of Corpus Cast.